Hello, this is Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to be talking you through the next section in the attachment topic, specifically animal studies, looking at the studies of Lorenz. Now, Lorenz was a ethologist. He was somebody who studied animals with the hope of trying to find out something about human behavior, and some of his research is something which you probably know of, but you may not know that it is Lorenz that did it. Now, this particular cartoon that I've put into your notes is something which I use to kind of introduce you to this idea. Now, first of all, obviously, look at the picture and we see that there's something a bit bizarre about it. Why would these geese be looking to Lorenz as if he's a parent? Why would they be following him? Well, we're going to soon find out in terms of looking at the research that Lorenz did. Now, there's an old video that you can find on YouTube that takes you through some of Lorenz's work. The link is in the description, and you may want to have a look at that particular video. Don't pay too much attention to kind of some of the kind of dated kind of ideas, but certainly will give you a really good feel of kind of how Conrad Lorenz did his research. So we see in terms of this, he wanted to see if there's a relationship between infant animals and their mothers, and his observations pretty much have helped us understand human attachment. Let's have a look at one of the key studies that he did in his research. So first of all, he randomly divided a clutch of goose eggs into two groups. Half the eggs were hatched naturally by the mother. The other half were hatched by Lorenz himself. He placed them in an incubator, and the first moving object they saw was Lorenz. What he noticed was that the group of hatchlings that were hatched by Lorenz himself followed him everywhere, whereas quite naturally you'd expect the group that was hatched by the mother followed her. But probably what was really interesting we see is that when he mixed these two groups together, the control group and the group that he hatched, they didn't suddenly go, okay, so that is what a bird looks like, that's what my mother should be, I'm going to go and follow her. They kept on following Lorenz. So he called this phenomenon imprinting. And I suppose we are used to this before. Some of you might have read some of the books where there is certainly, or the Twilight series where they talk about imprinting. That's kind of something slightly different and is a bit related to Harlow's research. But this word imprinting, this idea, it kind of makes a special print on the baby's kind of mind and body. And we find that this is specific to geese and ducks. And a lot of kind of birds where the first moving object they see is the one that becomes imprinted on them. But what is probably the most important aspect of this particular research is that he decided or identified a critical period. Something that is critical is obviously there's kind of an urgency to it. So there's urgency to this time frame in which the imprinting needs to take place. He said he was able to figure out, depending on the species of animals and birds, that it was a couple of hours after hatching. And I suppose what is really important here, and I'm going to underline it, it says if it does not occur, okay, the chicks did not attach themselves. So in other words, this critical period involved this understanding that if it doesn't happen, then it's not going to happen. Now, this phenomenon is actually kind of, you see from from Lorenz's research, is set back in 1935, and he continues to do his work through the 1950s and 60s. And so a PBS television series decided to do a study on a group of goslings to kind of film them in flight. And in order to do this, they got this pilot to and photographer to imprint a set of geese onto him, and then kind of get them kind of naturalized into kind of flying, and then so that they can fly with him in his microlight airplane. Definitely worth watching. I can't find all of the series on YouTube, but definitely worth having a look at. Now, obviously, they haven't given us too much clarity as to what we need to know about Lorenz, and so the classic understanding of imprinting is obviously quite important. But Lorenz also took this a little bit further, and he said that that this imprinting also related to mate preferences. And what he did is that he observed that these birds would kind of display and court the humans in terms of their kind of natural behavior. He had a case study where he found a peacock that had been reared in a reptile house, and found that the peacock was trying to kind of display and kind of show itself in kind of a mating behavior towards this giant tortoise. Now, we see that obviously, kind of building on from his original imprinting idea, he kind of calls this sexual imprinting. Now, as you might notice, there's not a great amount of kind of detail relating to this particular content. We need to know about Lorenz. We need to know exactly what it is that he does. So the next part is for us to consider just some evaluation points. And we see here that the first one is that we can't generalize the findings to humans. It's not just a criticism of Lorenz, it's a criticism of all animal studies, but we've got to be wary of taking kind of animal research and specifically saying, well, this is exactly what we find in human beings. He looked specifically at birds, and it could have that his findings are interesting. As I said, this critical period becomes something which is picked up later by other kind of researchers, but we've got to worry about kind of how specific can we get. So, for example, it's humans are mammals and birds are avian, so therefore there could be some big issues here. And we see, for example, that mammals have a much greater emotional attachment towards their young. A classic example of this is how a mammal will potentially tend and care to the young, even if it's not her own, in contrast to perhaps a bird. If a bird falls out of the nest, it will die because the parents will not do anything in order to kind of care for it once it's out of the nest. We also know that that mammals are able to form attachments after the critical period. We often kind of do this within kind of farms and stuff like that, especially if there is an animal that's kind of either been rejected by its mother or kind of lost its mother. We often kind of put these two together. So it seems that there is pretty much a limitation here in terms of it being appropriate for us to even take too much of Lorenz's ideas and kind of use them for our understanding of human kind of infant behavior. We find that Lorenz, kind of being one of the first people to kind of, or the first person to kind of coin the phrase imprinting and kind of get the importance of kind of the research that he has, we find that some people did question his research much later. In fact, his biggest kind of issue that people had was this idea of sexual imprinting. Guiton famously tried to kind of study this mating behavior and reared kind of chickens using one of those yellow kind of washing up gloves, and basically to kind of clarify, to make it slightly crude, yes, these chickens would naturally be intended to try and mate with the yellow glove, mostly because they were a little bit kind of inexperienced and didn't kind of know what to do. But eventually, when they were able to be successful prefer to mate with other chickens rather than with the rubber glove. So it could be that that the imprinting that we're talking about is not as permanent as Lorenz would like us to believe, and therefore this is a criticism of Lorenz's research. Now, the questions that we have are either generally going to be focused on animal research and relevance towards infant attachments, or it's going to give you something specifically about Lorenz, and we see here outlined the procedure used in one study of animals in terms of attachment, and this would be kind of clearly for 4 marks. You've got to kind of make sure that you get the key aspects of the Lorenz's study. I hope that you have enjoyed this. It's never going to be a long video, but it will give you some kind of taste as to what you need for the particular topic. Thank you and good night.